In 2005, a 67-year-old volunteer vanished from Yellowstone without a trace. 9 years later, a biologist discovered something chilling. Dozens of visitors had reported seeing the same ghostly figure at the exact spot where she disappeared. But here's what made it even stranger. Every single witness described her wearing the same clothes, the exact uniform she wore on her last day, and they all reported the same thing. She was standing completely still, staring at the trail as if she was waiting for something. Her name was Margaret Hayes. For 6 months, she'd been the kind of volunteer every park dreams of having. Reliable, knowledgeable, the type who remembered every visitor's name and could tell you which trail would give you the best view of the sunrise. She'd moved to Gardner, Montana after her husband died, trading her Chicago classroom for the silence of the mountains. She told her daughter it was temporary, just a season to clear her head. She never left. Margaret Hayes wasn't someone you'd expect to disappear. She was a planner, the type of person who kept backup batteries in her purse and always arrived 15 minutes early. For 34 years, she'd taught 5th grade at Lincoln Elementary in Chicago. Her students loved her because she treated their questions seriously, no matter how strange they were. When her husband Robert died in 2004, Margaret's carefully constructed life collapsed. They'd been married for 41 years. They'd planned to retire together, to travel, to finally visit all those national parks they'd marked on their map. But a heart attack took him on a Tuesday morning, right there at the breakfast table, and suddenly Margaret was alone. She tried to keep teaching, but standing in that classroom, surrounded by 10-year-olds asking about ecosystems and photosynthesis, she felt like she was drowning. Everything reminded her of Robert. The way he'd quiz her on state capitals while she graded papers. The way he'd leave Post-it notes in her lunch bag with terrible jokes. Her daughter Claire noticed. "Mom, you need a change. Get out of Chicago for a while." Margaret had always wanted to see Yellowstone. Robert had promised to take her, but they'd never found the time. So in March 2005, on what would have been their 42nd anniversary, Margaret packed a single suitcase and drove west. She told Claire it would be 2 weeks, maybe 3. She rented a tiny apartment in Gardner, Montana, just outside the park's north entrance. The walls were thin and the heating barely worked, but through her bedroom window she could see the mountains. Real mountains, not the flat horizon of Illinois. She started hiking immediately. Small trails at first, then longer ones. She bought a proper pack, good boot, a field guide to Rocky Mountain wildflowers. She'd wake up at dawn and walk until her legs ached, and for the first time since Robert died, she felt something other than grief. After a month, she walked into the Mammoth Hot Springs Visitor Center and asked if they needed volunteers. The supervisor, a weathered man named Dale Hutchins, looked her over. "You ever worked in a park before?" "No," Margaret said, "but I taught elementary school for 34 years. I can handle tourists." Dale smiled. "When can you start?" Margaret became the kind of volunteer every park dreams about. She was patient with confused visitors, firm with rule breakers, and genuinely enthusiastic about every aspect of Yellowstone. She memorized trail conditions, thermal feature names, wildlife patterns. She could tell you the best time to see bison near Lamar Valley, or which overlook had the clearest view of the Grand Prismatic Spring. Other volunteers came and went, doing their required hours before moving on. Margaret stayed. She worked 3 shifts a week at the visitor center and spent the rest of her time exploring. She started keeping a journal, filling it with sketches and observations. She photographed lichen patterns on rock. She tracked the migration of elk herds. Dale sometimes worried she was becoming too attached. "You know this is just a volunteer position, right? We can't pay you." "I don't need money," Margaret said. "I need this." What she meant was, she needed something that wasn't Chicago. Something that wasn't an empty house and Robert's reading glasses still on the nightstand. Claire called every Sunday. "When are you coming home?" "Soon," Margaret always said, but she never bought a return ticket. By September, Margaret had been at Yellowstone for 6 months. She'd hiked over 200 miles. She knew the names of the seasonal rangers and the rotation schedule for the visitor center. She'd found a routine, a rhythm. For the first time since Robert died, She wasn't just surviving, she was living. But something had changed in her. The other volunteers noticed it. She'd become quieter, more distant. She spent her breaks staring out at the mountains, as if she were searching for something. Dale asked her about it once. "You okay, Margaret? You seem distracted." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, just thinking." "About what?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you ever feel like this place is trying to tell you something?" Dale laughed it off. "It's a park, Margaret. It doesn't talk." But Margaret kept staring at the mountains. "Maybe," she said softly, "or maybe we just don't know how to listen." That was 2 weeks before she disappeared. Margaret worked the visitor center at Mammoth Hot Springs 3 days a week. The rest of her time she spent hiking. She knew the backcountry better than rangers who'd worked there for years. She carried the same pack every time, green canvas, frayed at the corners, with a small patch sewn on the front that read, "Mrs. Hayes, 5th grade." On September 23rd, 2005, she clocked in at 7 in the morning. Her shift was supposed to end at 3. At 2:47 p.m., she told a coworker she was stepping out to check a trail marker near the Bunsen Peak trailhead. It was a 10-minute walk, something she'd done 100 times before. She never came back. At first, no one panicked. Margaret was competent, self-sufficient. But when the sun started to set, and her car was still in the lot, the park initiated a search. They found her lunch bag on the desk, her jacket on the chair, her phone charging behind the counter. She'd left with nothing but the clothes on her back. The search lasted 11 days. They covered every inch of the trail, brought in dogs, helicopters, thermal imaging. They found nothing. No footprints, no torn fabric, no sign she'd ever been there at all. The initial search was massive. When a volunteer disappears in a national park, especially someone as reliable as Margaret Hayes, the response is immediate and thorough. Within 3 hours of her being reported missing, a team of 12 rangers was deployed. They started at the Bunsen Peak trailhead, the last place anyone had seen her heading. The trail marker she'd mentioned checking was right there, intact, showing no signs of damage or disturbance. But Margaret was nowhere. Dale Hutchins led the first sweep. He knew Margaret's habits better than anyone. She wasn't reckless. She wouldn't have wandered off trail without good reason. But as he walked the path she should have taken, calling her name into the growing darkness, a sick feeling settled in his stomach. By midnight, they'd brought in thermal imaging drones. The technology was new then, expensive, reserved for serious emergencies. The infrared cameras swept the area in a grid pattern, searching for heat signatures. They picked up elk, a black bear, even a lone coyote, but no human. Day 2 brought search dogs, 3 German shepherds trained in wilderness tracking. They were given items from Margaret's apartment, her pillow, her jacket. The dogs moved with purpose along the trail, noses low, then suddenly stopped at the exact spot where the clearing opened up. They wouldn't go further. The handlers tried coaxing them, but all 3 dogs sat down and refused to move. One of them, a normally aggressive male named Gunner, started whimpering. "That's unusual," the lead handler said. "They're trained to push through distractions." "What kind of distractions?" Dale asked. The handler looked uncomfortable. "Animal remains, strong scent, anything that might throw off their tracking. Is there something out there?" The handler didn't answer directly. "These dogs have found bodies in avalanches, people buried under 10 feet of snow. They don't scare easy." He looked at the spot where all 3 dogs had stopped. "But something here is making them nervous." They brought in a helicopter on day 3. The pilot swept the area in expanding circles, scanning every ravine, every cluster of trees. At high altitude, Yellowstone looks like a patchwork quilt, beautiful and vast and utterly indifferent to human suffering. The helicopter found nothing. Claire arrived on day 4. She'd driven straight from Denver, barely stopping, surviving on coffee and panic. When she saw Dale, she grabbed his arm. "Why haven't you found her yet?" Dale had no good answer. "We're doing everything we can. It's not enough." Claire joined the search parties. She shouldn't have been allowed to. She wasn't trained, but no one had the heart to tell her no. She walked the trails until her feet blistered, calling her mother's name until her voice cracked. At night, she sat in Margaret's apartment, looking at the journal her mother had been keeping. The last entry was from the morning of her disappearance. It was a simple observation about a hawk she'd seen, nothing unusual, nothing that suggested she was planning to do anything dangerous. By day 7, the search had expanded to a 5-mile radius. Over 100 people were involved: rangers, volunteers, local law enforcement, even civilian hikers who'd heard about the missing woman and wanted to help. They found pieces of other people's tragedies: a rusted camping stove from the 1980s, a torn backpack that had been there so long moss had grown over it, scattered bones that turned out to be elk, not human. But nothing of Margaret's. The media picked up the story. Local news crews set up outside the park entrance, interviewing anyone who'd known her. Margaret's former students in Chicago started a Facebook page sharing memories and prayers. The story made national headlines for a day, then faded as newer tragedies took its place. On day 9, a forensic team was brought in to examine the area around the trail marker more closely. They used ground-penetrating radar, looking for any sign of recently disturbed earth. They checked for blood evidence using luminol. They took soil samples. Everything came back negative. On day 11, the official search was suspended. Not ended, just suspended. There was a difference, the Park Service explained to Claire. If new evidence emerged, they'd resume immediately. Claire stood in the clearing where her mother should have been. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful. Her mother would have loved it. "Where are you?" Claire whispered. The mountains didn't answer. Dale pulled her aside before she left. "We're not giving up," he said. "I knew your mother. She was a good person. We'll keep looking." But his eyes said what his mouth wouldn't. People who disappear in Yellowstone usually stay disappeared. Claire drove back to Denver the next morning. She left her number with every ranger station, every visitor center, every local sheriff's office within 50 miles. She made them promise to call if anything at all, was found. Weeks passed, then months. The case file was moved from active to cold. Margaret Hayes became a statistic, another name on the long list of people who'd walked into the American wilderness and never walked out. But Dale never stopped looking. On his days off, he'd hike the Bunsen Peak Trail, always stopping at that clearing. He'd stand there, just like the search dogs had, feeling something he couldn't name. It felt like being watched, and he wasn't the only one who felt it. Margaret's daughter, Claire, flew in from Denver. She walked the trails herself, calling her mother's name until her voice gave out. She couldn't understand it. Her mother wasn't reckless. She wasn't the type to wander off without telling anyone. But the park is unforgiving. Every year people disappear. Some are found. Most aren't. After 2 weeks, the official search was called off. Margaret Hayes was declared a missing person. Her case file was added to a growing stack of unsolved disappearances in America's national parks. Claire went home. She kept Margaret's apartment exactly as it was. She called the park every month for updates. There were never any updates. Years passed. The case grew cold. Margaret became a name in a database, a cautionary tale told to new volunteers during orientation. The park moved on. But something strange started happening. In 2007, a hiker named Tom Callahan filed a report. He'd been on the Bunsen Peak Trail just after dawn when he saw a woman standing off the path. She was older, gray-haired, wearing a park volunteer uniform. He waved. She didn't respond. When he looked back a few seconds later, she was gone. He didn't think much of it. Volunteers patrolled the trails all the time. But then it happened again. In 2009, a family from Ohio reported seeing an elderly woman in a green vest standing near the same trailhead. She wasn't moving, just staring at the path. They assumed she was lost and approached to help. She vanished. Not walked away. Vanished. The father swore she'd been there 1 second and gone the next. Park rangers dismissed it. Tricks of the light, exhaustion, the mind playing games at high altitude. But the reports kept coming. By 2012, there were 14 separate sightings, all in the same area, all describing the same woman. Gray hair pulled back in a bun, green volunteer vest, khaki pants, standing perfectly still, staring at the trail. The witnesses came from different backgrounds, different parts of the country, different times of year. But their stories had an eerie consistency that made even the most skeptical rangers uncomfortable. Tom Callahan, the first person to report seeing her, was a former Marine, not someone prone to flights of imagination. When park rangers followed up with him, he was insistent. "I know what I saw," he said. "She was standing about 20 feet off the trail, gray hair, green vest. I thought maybe she was taking photos or something. But she wasn't holding a camera, she wasn't holding anything, just standing there." Did she seem lost? No. That's the thing. She seemed purposeful, like she was supposed to be there. But when you looked back, she was gone? Tom hesitated. Not gone like she walked away, gone like she was never there. I only looked away for 3, maybe 4 seconds. No one can move that fast, especially not an elderly woman on uneven terrain. The Ohio family's report in 2009 was even stranger. They'd been hiking with their 2 kids when they saw her. The father, Jason Murphy, recorded a statement. "My son saw her first. He's 8. He notices everything. He said, 'Dad, why is that lady just standing there?' We all looked. She was maybe 30 feet away, partially behind a tree. My wife called out, 'Excuse me, do you need help?' The woman didn't respond, didn't even turn her head. 'What did you do?' We walked toward her. We thought maybe she was hard of hearing or disoriented, but as we got closer," he paused. "This is going to sound crazy. Go on." "She didn't look solid. I mean, she looked real, but also kind of transparent, like we could see the trees through her. My wife grabbed the kids and we backed away. When I looked again, she was gone." The interviewing ranger noted, family appeared genuinely shaken. Children were crying. No signs of drug or alcohol use. No reason to believe they're fabricating. In 2010, a park ranger named Sarah Chen reported an encounter during a dawn patrol. Sarah was tough, practical, not someone who believed in ghost stories. "I was checking trail conditions after a storm," she told investigators. "It was barely light out. I saw someone standing near the clearing. I thought it was another early hiker. I called out. No response. I got closer and realized it was an older woman in a volunteer uniform. Wrong time of day for volunteers to be out. I asked if she was okay. What happened?" She turned to look at me. I'll never forget her face. She looked sad, devastatingly sad, but also peaceful, if that makes sense. She stared at me for maybe 5 seconds, then she smiled, and then she just faded, like she was made of mist. Faded? I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you what I saw. She didn't walk away. She faded. 1 second she was there, the next she was translucent. Then she was gone. Sarah took 3 days off after that. She considered quitting. She'd grown up Mormon, didn't believe in ghosts, had always prided herself on being rational. But what she'd seen had no rational explanation. The reports kept coming. A college student from Oregon described seeing her in 2011, an elderly couple from Texas in 2012. a group of German tourists in 2013. All of them described the same woman, same clothes, same sad expression, same impossible disappearance. What terrified people most wasn't the sighting itself, it was the feeling that came with it. Almost every witness reported the same sensation, overwhelming sadness, a grief so profound it felt physical. Some people cried without knowing why. Others felt a desperate urge to help, to reach out, to save someone from something terrible. But when they tried to approach, she vanished. A psychologist consulted by the Park Service suggested mass hysteria. One person reports seeing something, others hear about it, their minds fill in the details. It's a known phenomenon. But that didn't explain the people who'd never heard about Margaret Hayes, the tourists from Germany who filed a report and only later learned a volunteer had disappeared in that exact spot. They couldn't have known what to expect, yet they all saw the same thing. By 2014, the legend had spread throughout the park. New rangers were told about the Bunsen Peak ghost during unofficial orientations. Tourists started asking about her. Some came specifically hoping to see her, treating it like a paranormal attraction. The Park Service hated it. They issued a statement. There is no evidence of paranormal activity in Yellowstone National Park. Reports of unusual sightings can be attributed to wildlife, natural phenomena, or misidentification. But privately, rangers were less certain. Dale Hutchins, who'd led the original search for Margaret, refused to hike that trail anymore. When asked why, he'd shake his head. "I don't like how it feels." "How does it feel?" "Like someone's waiting for you." And not in a good way. That was the atmosphere when Dr. Elliot Chen arrived and started compiling data. He didn't know he was about to solve the mystery, or make it so much worse. None of the witnesses knew about Margaret Hayes. None of them knew a volunteer had disappeared there 7 years earlier. They just knew what they'd seen. And then, in 2014, everything changed. Dr. Elliot Chen was a wildlife biologist hired by the park to study elk migration patterns. He was methodical, data-driven, the kind of person who triple-checked every calculation. He'd been compiling GPS data from trail reports, trying to map out where visitors most frequently encountered wildlife. That's when he noticed something odd. There was a cluster of incident reports, all flagged under strange encounter or unknown person, all concentrated in a 50-meter radius near Bunsen Peak. He pulled the files, 23 reports over 9 years. Every single one described the same thing. An elderly woman, green vest, standing still, disappearing. Elliot cross-referenced the location with historical records. That's when he found Margaret Hayes. He sat in his office for a long time, staring at the map. 23 people had seen something in the exact spot where a woman had vanished without explanation. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he couldn't ignore the data. If you're hooked on stories like this that blend real wilderness terror with unbelievable twists, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Elliot did what any scientist would do. He investigated. He started by interviewing the witnesses. Most of them were still reachable. A retired couple from Texas, a college student from Oregon, a park ranger who'd been working a morning shift. Their stories were consistent, too consistent. They all described her appearance in exact detail, the way her hair was tied back, the worn look of her vest, the way she stood with her hands at her sides, not moving, not acknowledging anyone. And they all said the same thing. When they looked away, even for a second, she was gone. Elliot asked them to mark the exact spot on a map. Every single person pointed to the same location, a small clearing just off the main trail, surrounded by pine trees, with a clear view of the valley below. It was exactly where Margaret Hayes had been heading the day she disappeared. Elliot decided to spend the night there. He set up a motion sensor camera, a thermal imager, and an audio recorder. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he knew he needed documentation. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, at 3:17 a.m., the motion sensor triggered. Elliot jolted awake. He checked the camera feed. There was nothing there. No animal, no person. But the sensor had clearly detected movement. He reviewed the thermal footage. For a split second, just a fraction of a frame, there was a heat signature, human-shaped, standing exactly where the witnesses had described. Then it was gone. Elliot's hands were shaking as he replayed the footage. He was a scientist. He didn't believe in the supernatural, but he couldn't explain what he was seeing. He decided to go public. He contacted Claire Hayes, Margaret's daughter. She'd never stopped looking for answers. When Elliot told her about the sightings, she didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss him. She said, "I always knew she was still there." Claire flew back to Yellowstone. She wanted to see the spot for herself. Elliot took her to the clearing. She stood there for a long time, not saying anything. Then she knelt down and started digging. Elliot asked what she was doing. Claire said her mother used to bury time capsules with her students, small metal boxes filled with notes and photographs. It was a tradition. If she was here, Claire said, she would have left something. They dug for 20 minutes. And then Claire's hand hit metal. It was a small tin box, rusted and dented. Inside was a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was Margaret's. The note was dated September 23, 2005, the day she disappeared. It read, "If you're reading this, I didn't make it back. I saw something up here. I don't know what it was, but I had to follow it. I'm not afraid. I just need to know. Tell Claire I love her. Tell her I'm sorry." The note ended there. No explanation. No details about what she'd seen or where she'd gone. But it confirmed something. Margaret had come to this spot intentionally. She'd buried the note, knowing she might not return. Elliot and Claire sat in silence. The wind moved through the trees. The valley stretched out below them, vast and indifferent. If you're gripped by this wild turn of events, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Claire insisted they keep searching. If her mother had left a note, maybe she'd left other clues. They expanded the search radius, combing through the underbrush, checking behind rocks and fallen logs. 3 hours later, Elliot found something wedged between two boulders. It was Margaret's pack, the green canvas one with the patch that read Mrs. Hayes, 5th grade. It was intact, no tears, no signs of animal interference. It looked like it had been carefully placed there, hidden deliberately. Inside, they found her water bottle, still half full, a granola bar, a small notebook. The notebook was filled with entries, journal-style observations about the park, sketches of plants and birds, notes about weather patterns. Margaret had been documenting everything. The last entry was dated the day she disappeared. It read, "Saw something near the ridgeline this morning. Human-shaped but wrong. Moved too smoothly. Didn't leave tracks. I know I should report it, but I need to see it again. I need to understand." Below that, she'd drawn a rough map. An X marked a location about 2 miles northeast, deeper into the backcountry. Elliot looked at Claire. "Did your mother ever talk about seeing anything unusual?" Claire shook her head. She wasn't the type to believe in that kind of thing. She was practical, logical. Then what made her follow it? Claire didn't have an answer. They decided to hike to the location marked on the map. It took them 4 hours to reach it. The terrain was rough, overgrown, far off any established trail. This wasn't a place casual hikers would stumble upon. When they arrived, they found a small, natural cave. The entrance was hidden behind a curtain of vines and moss. Inside, the cave opened into a larger chamber, cool and dark. Elliot swept his flashlight across the walls, and then he stopped. The walls were covered in markings, not graffiti, not random scratches. These were deliberate, symbols, patterns, and in the center, carved deep into the stone, was a single word: wait. Elliot's heart was pounding. What is this? Claire stepped closer. She ran her fingers over the carving. The edges were worn, but the word was unmistakable. She was here, Claire whispered. She carved this. But why? What was she waiting for? Elliot scanned the rest of the cave. In the far corner, partially buried under dirt and debris, he found something else. A second tin box. This one was newer, less rusted. Inside was another note, dated 6 months. The handwriting was shaky, hurried. It read, "I've been here too long. I see it every night now. It's not human. It's not animal. It watches. It waits. I tried to leave, but I can't find the way back. If someone finds this, don't come looking. Just tell Claire I tried." The note was signed with Margaret's initials. Elliot and Claire stared at each other. Margaret had been alive 6 months after she disappeared. She'd been here, in this cave, for at least that long. But if she'd been here, why didn't she return? Why didn't she call for help? And what had she been seeing? Elliot examined the cave more closely. There were signs of habitation, a makeshift sleeping area, empty food wrappers, a small pile of firewood never burned. Margaret had survived here for months, alone. But then what happened? They searched the surrounding area, expanding outward from the cave. They found nothing, no remains, no clothing, no sign of where Margaret had gone next. It was as if she'd simply ceased to exist. If this heart-wrenching journey keeps you on edge, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Claire refused to give up. She contacted the Park Service, demanded they reopen the case. With Elliot's findings, they had no choice. A new search team was assembled: cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, forensic specialists. They focused on the area around the cave. On the 3rd day, one of the dogs hit on something. It was a shallow depression about 100 meters from the cave entrance, covered by years of fallen leaves and soil. The team carefully excavated the site. What they found changed everything. It was a body, female, elderly, dressed in a park volunteer uniform. DNA testing confirmed it was Margaret Hayes. But here's what didn't make sense. The forensic analysis determined she'd died within days of her disappearance, not 6 months later. The second note, the one dated March 2006, shouldn't have existed. Elliot couldn't reconcile it. The handwriting matched. The details matched. Margaret had written that note, but she'd been dead for months when it was supposedly written, unless someone else had written it. But who? And why? The investigation deepened. Handwriting experts confirmed the note was authentic. Margaret's daughter verified the phrasing, the word choices, even the way she signed her initials. Margaret had written that note 6 months after she died. Theories emerged. Some said it was a hoax. Others believed Margaret had written multiple notes before she died, dating them in advance. But that didn't explain the specific details. the references to things that had happened after her death. The rational explanations didn't hold. And then there were the sightings. They hadn't stopped. Even after Margaret's body was found, people still reported seeing her. The same location, the same description. Standing still, staring at the trail, waiting. The Park Service never released an official explanation. They attributed Margaret's death to exposure and disorientation. They said she'd gotten lost, tried to survive in the cave, and eventually succumbed to the elements. But that didn't explain the note. It didn't explain the sightings. It didn't explain what she'd been waiting for. Claire held a small memorial service at the clearing where her mother had left the first note. She buried a new time capsule there, filled with photographs and letters from Margaret's former students. She loved this place, Claire said. Maybe that's why she stayed. Elliot Chin left Yellowstone 6 months later. He never published his findings. When asked why, he said he couldn't find a way to explain it that didn't sound insane. But he still has the footage, the thermal image of a human shape that appeared for one frame and then vanished. He watches it sometimes, late at night, trying to make sense of it. He never does. The Bunsen Peak Trail is still open. Thousands of people hike it every year, and every so often someone files a report. An elderly woman in a green vest, gray hair tied back, standing off the path, not moving, not responding, and then, in an instant, she's gone. The Park Service doesn't investigate anymore. They file the reports and move on. But the locals know. The rangers know. Margaret Hayes is still out there, still waiting. For what? No one can say. Maybe she's waiting for an answer to the question she asked in her note. What did she see that day? Maybe she's waiting for someone to understand. Or maybe she's waiting for something that never came. In the end, the wilderness keeps its secrets. It doesn't explain. It doesn't apologize. It just waits. And so does she. If this journey through survival and mystery captivates you, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Margaret's story became a legend in Yellowstone, not in the way ghost stories usually do, with exaggeration and embellishment, but in a quieter, more unsettling way. New volunteers are sometimes told about her during orientation, not officially, but in the way people share warnings when the supervisors aren't listening. If you see someone who looks like they need help but won't respond, they say, just keep walking. Claire still visits once a year. She hikes to the clearing, sits by the time capsule she buried, and talks to her mother. She tells her about her life, about her kids, about the world that kept spinning after Margaret disappeared. She never sees anything, no figure in the trees, no movement in the corner of her vision. But she feels something, a presence, a watching. I think she's protecting this place, Claire said in an interview years later. I think whatever she saw, whatever pulled her into those woods, she's standing guard now, making sure it doesn't follow anyone else out. It's a comforting thought. Maybe too comforting, because the truth is simpler and darker. We don't know what happened to Margaret Hayes. We don't know what she saw. We don't know why she followed it. We don't know how she survived for months in a cave, or how a note appeared that she couldn't have written, or why people still see her standing in the same spot, year after year. We only know that she's there, and that sometimes, when you're alone on that trail, when the wind dies down and the forest goes quiet, you might see her too, an old woman in a green vest, standing perfectly still, staring at something just beyond the trees. And if you do see her, the advice is always the same. Don't approach. Don't call out. Don't try to help. Just keep walking. Because Margaret Hayes isn't lost anymore. She knows exactly where she is. She's exactly where she's supposed to be, waiting. The question isn't whether she's still there. The question is, what is she waiting for? And will it ever come?